Sveiki, įsijungę tinklalaidę Lietuva Amerika. Aš Vincentas Paulinskas. Šiandieną pažintis su Vengrija, kurią mažai kas mato šiais laikais be juodų kremlinių dūmų. Šiandien matome kiek kitokią Vengriją. Ta, kuri nebijo mesti iššūkį autokratijai. Ir ta tema šiandieną mūsų pašnekovas Matyasu Bodi, vienas iš naujosios partijos Tisza aktyvistų, kuri per trumpą laiką tapo rimčiausia alternatyva Viktorui Orbánui. Šiame epizode kalbamės apie tai, kaip valdantieji bando blokuoti Tiszą dalyvavimą rinkimuose, kaip atrodo strategija siekiant sugrąžinti Vengriją į vakarus ir kokių veiksmų reikia, kad Orbánas prarastų savo įtaką tiek šalies viduje, tiek Europos Sąjungoje. Kaip kovoti su rusiška propaganda ir ką reiškia būti europietišku vengru Orbánu Vengrijoje. Ir galiausiai, ką iš to galime išmokti mes Lietuvoje. Gero klausimo, tikiuosi, kad patiks.
I'm here.
Hey, Matyasu, how are you?
Hello. Yes, to meet you. We are in all different places. I am like at more or less at the sea side of Lithuania, that's the western side of Lithuania, and Vincentas is in Belgium, and you are in Hungary. So
No,
Europe.
in Barcelona.
Oh, you are in Barcelona still. Oh my God. Okay.
No, actually, so I live in Barcelona with my family. So yes, I am resident of Spain. Yes, so we have been living here for 5 years now.
Okay, it's too dangerous for you in Hungary.
It's better to be here now.
Okay.
That's wish.
Okay.
Europe Day, we are all in different places, but let's start.
Yeah.
Let's ask maybe Vincentas to lead because he was the one to introduce us. I don't have like a lot of time. I would say 20 minutes if that's okay, but let's see how it works. Please, Vincent.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. So, Žygimantai, Matyasu, it's good to see you guys, especially on such a symbolic day. It's Europe Day, right? And as Žygis already said, we are all throughout Europe, but together we are sitting down to have this great conversation today about not only the future of Europe, but the future of one of the most interesting aspects of Europe right now, which is Hungary. So, Matyasu, first of all, it's a pleasure to have you on. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we go into the nitty-gritty of the issues of Tisza and what we can do for Hungary.
Yeah, thank you, Rich, and thanks for inviting me. So yeah, my name is Matyasu Bodi, and originally I am a geographer and cartographer. And I also did my PhD in political science and political geography. So my main research area and topic is the understanding of the electoral behavior of Hungarian and other Central European nations and people. So what are the biggest social and traditional historical cleavages between different political parties? So that's my research area. Apart from that, I'm also an IT advisor in the private sector. So that's why I'm living in Spain at the moment. But apparently I'm examining and researching the Hungarian society very deeply. And just for you to know, I'm also an editor and presenter in various Hungarian media outlets when it comes to political news, political correspondence, and these kind of things.
Okay, maybe let's start. Really well with Hungary. I still remember that Hungary was so much ahead of us. We all were going to your free universities and learning how to revolt against the Soviets. What kind of way forward you see? I heard a lot of things that opposition is growing, that you have elections next year. I heard about a referendum for Ukrainian accession to you. So do you think this time we can stop Orbán inside Hungary, or we should do something outside in Brussels, fixing and changing our rules in Brussels just to let integration go and not to be a hostage of Russians and Chinese with the hands of Orbán?
Yeah, so it's a bunch of questions. So let me first address the domestic issues in Hungary. So indeed, Orbán is in power with a supermajority in the parliament since 2010. but he was also prime minister in 1998 all the way to 2002. Like he was a super young, very Western-oriented leader in that time. And, you know, in 2010, he got the supermajority because of the poor performance maybe from his successor, the Hungarian Socialist Party. They just completely destroyed the country economically. So, you know, Orbán was in a very, you know, lucky situation at that time that he won the supermajority, even in the old electoral system. By the way, we still have a very similar electoral system like you guys in Lithuania. So we have electoral districts, we have party lists, but we will talk about it later. So there was no any real chance until now to get Orbán ousted from power, because the opposition parties were extremely fragmented, and they actually even hated each other much more than Orbán, to be honest. So we didn't really have a united opposition until recently. In the latest election in 2022, we had an officially united opposition, but it was also like fragmented into different parties, all the way from the far right to the center left and traditional socialist parties. And, you know, in that campaign, the Hungarian people, you know, smell that these people are not really, you know, like each other. They cannot really work together. So it was hard to sell the story that they are able to oust Orbán and run the country effectively. And that's why Orbán, again, celebrated another 2/3 supermajority 3 years ago as well. The thing has changed radically last year, because in the EU election, this new party, the Tisza party, came up from nothing. It was a completely new party. The guy, Péter Magyar, who actually formed the party, was member of the Fidesz party previously. So, and for that reason, it's a big challenge for Orbán, like how to attack his character, because he's a very, you know, center-right conservative guy. He's using the very similar symbolic system. Like he was always asking his supporters to bring the national flag to his campaign events and to the rallies. So on an ideological ground, it's really hard to challenge this person, because he is somewhat similar, at least from the origin of Fidesz, like as a center-right kind of ideological sentiments. So he's not a, you know, progressive, liberal, whatever kind of guy with whom they were easily, you know, defeat previously. So that's one thing. And also, you know, because I always believe that there is some sort of dissatisfaction toward Orbán domestically, but there was no any single party who could cover these kind of people on the field. And now there is one party who is really act as an umbrella organization, and under this umbrella, all the opposition people and all the opposition forces can be united. And as you said, we only have now 11 months until the next election, which is super close. The country is already in a campaign mode. So every single day there is something. There is a lot of things. Like Péter Magyar is already making his tour in the country. He's showing up in different rural places and the countryside. So he's really campaigning. And Orbán also started doing the same, like as a reaction. So it's crazy. I mean, the country is already in a campaign mode. And to answer your question, I do believe, and that's the first time I truly believe that this regime can be defeated in an election. But the question is that how this election will be, if they're going to change the rules since then, I mean, until that time, or what do they try to do to somehow prevent the opposition to get into power?
Well, if I may, I was just going to quickly ask, because, I mean, this all sounds great. This sounds like paradise. We want to see a free Hungary, but we're starting to get whiffs of these intentions from Fidesz, from Orbán, to essentially make the Tisza party illegal, to keep you guys from running, from taking over. I mean, how is this happening, and is it possible to fight back?
Yeah, so they recently passed a legislation in the parliaments asking or requesting the members of the European Parliament, the Hungarian members, to go public with their bank accounts and all these kind of things, like what kind of wealth they own. this is very similar we have for the Hungarian MPs within the Hungarian domestic parliaments. Even sometimes it's, you know, it's a joke because officially our prime minister has a bank account with roughly like, I don't know, like 2,000 euros or something like this, which is, you know, apparently no one believes, but that's the official statement. And the law is about if you forget to list any of your, you know, any of your stuff from this list, then you can be banned from running office in Hungary, which is something like a loaded gun on the table. You know, if you see these crime movies, if there is a gun on the table, then it's going to be used at some point of the movie. So some people are really think about it like this. So maybe it's just like a threat, maybe it's like a real gun. We don't know at the moment, but there is a gun on the table, definitely, yes.
So tell me, you know, how can we help? I know that like in all similar countries, it's very difficult to help because you are immediately accused of foreign intervention, and you know, Hungarians, you know, Orbán is using this kind of Russian type of law, or shall we really help you from Brussels in isolating Orbán, in punishing him, removing him from the table, though it's really difficult, as we know, in Brussels, you know, pushing for deepening of EU, because if we will enlarge to Ukraine and other countries, of course, you know, this system will not run as we tried to do in Valencia. Maybe you noticed in this Ukrainian declaration, we tried to remove veto power that Hungary, how Orbán uses to block accession talks with Ukrainians, that we would use the veto power just to close the negotiating chapters, not to open. So what would be your recommendation? Because, you know, your problems are our problems. They are Ukrainian problems. Ukrainians, by the way, are very nervous. My party leader is now in Kiev, and he said, you know what they said? Washington betrayed us with NATO. Now EU is betraying us with Hungary because you are blocking our accession talks. Moldovans are departing. They are starting quite, you know, negotiations are going on, but we are stuck. So they feel lost.
Yeah. Okay, so it's again, it's a very different aspects that you touched upon. But first of all, I truly believe that the problem of Hungary can be solved domestically. So I truly believe that if there is an issue with Orbán and the whole democracy, Hungarian society needs to fix it somehow. And I think we are on a good route. We are on a good way to achieve this, because, you know, if you look at the opinion polls, for instance, from the past 6 months, Tisza is ahead of Fidesz with at least like 5-6 points at every independent researcher company. And that's my personal interception as well, because whenever I talk with people, I really have this kind of sense. It's not about like the bubbles. I also have family members who were like supportive with Fidesz and Orbán, to be honest. I'm also coming from a conservative family, so, you know, and especially older generation people, they move and they shift their political preference much slower than younger people. So that's a scientific fact. So anyways, I do believe, I also sense this kind of change in the public opinion. But I also believe that the main reason for that is highly economical, because the country is really struggling, and mainly because of the decisions that the Orbán regime made 2, 3, or 5 years ago. That basically it was just you know, a kind of route dependency that we shouldn't follow. But anyways, to answer your question, I do believe that first of all we need to find a solution domestically. I think the thing that the Western Europeans and other countries should be watching is what is going to happen in the next few months in Hungary. So if you heard news that there are certain like new law or new kind of legislation that they try to pass, and you know, they still have 2/3 majority in the parliament. Tisza is not even in the Hungarian parliament. It's such a new party. So, you know, if you heard anything like this, maybe that's something that, you know, you can raise your voice on, or you can step on the feet of Orbán in that sense. But I think he's also, you know, he's also smart enough to to pass legislation that are not clearly, like not as clearly like in Belarus or Russia, going against the opposition, but it's a much more hidden way, much more an indirect way when he tries to achieve this, like the example I just told you about the European Parliament members' wealth and bank account.
Matyasu,
So,
if I may interrupt,
yeah.
I just have a quick question because I'm very interested in what you're saying. But what does the strategy look like right now? I mean, in terms of countering Orbán and Russian propaganda within Hungary, and of course, the Russians are guaranteed to be helping Orbán against Tisza. So, what's the strategy? How do you fight against this?
So it's very difficult because the media structure in Hungary it's very upside down. So the state media are reflecting in most cases like almost 100% of the communication of the Kremlin, like 100%. There are also media outlets that are like governmental affiliated who are somewhat or almost 100% are also reflecting the opinion of the Kremlin and the Russian propaganda regarding the Ukraine war. And we also have very influential people around the Fidesz party who are sharing these kind of ideologies. So let me share one example. Like I think 1 or 2 weeks ago, we had a very influential lady. She's also a business lady, Maria Schmidt, and she is also a member of the Fidesz party. And she said that in Bucha, it was not the Russians but the Ukrainians who actually killed the civilians. So this is something that he openly wrote down in a newspaper, and she still believes, and she's still staring this kind of fake news and fake allegations against the Ukrainians. And people can cry over in these kind of things, but this is there. I mean, and we don't even understand like what is the goal, because in a domestic sense, like winning an election, honestly speaking, I don't believe that it serves any kind of greater good to bring more people to the polling station without this. For me, it's just hard to believe. There's one thing you need to be aware of is that there is a huge dissatisfaction regarding how the government operates, how the country is, like the typical things like hospital, transportation, education, they are really bad shape. And the more time we spend on discussing foreign issues rather than discussing domestic issues is good for Fidesz, and that's why Fidesz is doing so. That's why they're trying to outrage people, Western people, domestic people with these kind of statements regarding Bucha or Kiev or whatever, just to get their attention from domestic issues, problems to foreign issues. I think that's a strategy they try to use. Look, how to address fake news and Russian propaganda, it's difficult. It's difficult because in the media, they are very strong. As I said, they are having power in the state media and a bunch of other media outlets, radios and everything. But also believe that, social media, and this is something, for instance, Peter Magyar is doing very great, that, on Facebook, if you see his numbers, like how many people is following her, how many interactions he generates, just like it's 3 or 4 times more than Orbán. It's not in the same level. But again, this is a kind of generational gap because, younger generation are consuming more social media. Older generation are consuming traditional media like TV, radio, printed media. And of course, those ones are more like pro-governmental, pro-Russian. So, it's really difficult. Well, I would say that, you can always try to educate people and try to uncover these kind of conspiracy theories and all these kind of things. We also have a few people like, let's say, Russian experts who speak very good, Russians, and they know the country and they have their own Facebook page, and they always try to create the counter narrative on the governmental communication. It depends on how many people can be reached like this.
What about groups of Lithuanians, Baltics? We've been, I was 19 when Soviet Union collapsed. I still speak Russian. I recognize those narratives. What about us coming to Hungary and explaining that, guys, vote right. This is about Europe. We want to create, and don't be Russian or Chinese puppets, because they are not destroying Hungary, they are destroying Europe. What about us doing it in your campaign? Or we will be just called, I don't know, American agents or...
Yeah, most likely that's the case. So yeah, so at this point, every foreigner is suspicious in their eyes. That's for sure. While it's very interesting because they even make a new office called like the defense of the Hungarian sovereignty or something like this. It's a new office. It's they have a legal power to fine like the civil society or even like raise legal prosecution against people on the basis of accepting foreign help. And this help can be like, money, this can be intellectual help, this can be a lot of other things. But the point is that it's coming outside the border, which is quite stupid because if you think about like how much Orbán and Fidesz helped financially the campaign of Le Pen, or how much money they gave to the campaign here in Spain for Vox, for Santiago Abascal, or how much money they invested in the Slovenian campaign in the media outlets of Janša at that time. So, Hungary...
I heard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That maybe I just missed the biggest example. Yeah. They even sent campaign experts to piss, some people may make a joke that maybe that's why they lost, but, and so Hungary always tried to interfere in a lot of foreign elections in Western and Central Europe. But whenever someone is showing up in the opposition side trying to help the opposition, they just like say, oh, this is a foreign Western agent, blah, blah, blah. It's a kind of funny because, I was born in 1988. So apparently I don't really have vivid memories about the socialism. But, my parents told me that the narrative was exactly the same in the communism, that if someone is coming from the West, it's suspicious, it's a spy, it's an American spy, whatever. So they just use the same kind of communication panels.
But what is funny, at the same time, they buy Russian gas, they take big money from Russia and China. And what is it? Is it not kind of foreign? And just, last question before Vincentas takes the lead. So I saw the initiative of European Commission, for example, to ban completely import of Russian gas towards EU. And I saw a very nervous reaction of Orbán because it will cut all his sources from Moscow. What do you think? Should we push for that?
Absolutely. But it's a very interesting situation because Donald Trump is also moving into this direction. And, Orbán and Trump were like super close allies. Orbán names was even mentioned in the presidential debate between Kamala Harris and Trump in the US. So, every American people must hear about Orbán, which is the prime minister of a small country, which is a kind of funny, but, his name, his brand is just so much bigger than Hungary it is. But anyways, back to Trump. So, he has this kind of businessman attitude. So he just wants to sell his own products, which is like natural gas from the US as well. And there is a clear conflict of interest between Orbán and Russia and the US, which is, I think it's going to be a clash between the US and Orbán as well. We don't know at this moment how it is going to evolve. What I have heard is, for instance, that we only have one big nuclear power plant in Hungary, Paks, and they just expanded because the first development is going to be ousted because of the time, and now we're going to build a new one. And in 2014, we made a contract with the Russians. It's going to be built by the Russians. And now the son of Trump was in the country last week, and I just heard rumors, it's not confirmed, that maybe the Russians are going to be replaced from this whole project, and it's going to be the US who is developing it because Trump really wants it. So, I think, Orbán is really, I think he's really pragmatical in the sense that when he feels power, like counter power, he's always backing. And I think Trump is a kind of guy that maybe can, step in his toe. And I think in that sense, at least in nuclear power, I think he will need to revisit his pro-Russian strategy. But I think in natural gas, that will happen as well. It's just the fact that from a geographical point of view, it's so much more difficult for him to import like LNG than Russian gas, which is coming from a pipeline. But the same situation can be mentioned in Slovakia and Austria, because these are all landlocked countries, so we don't have a sea and ports. But but indeed, natural gas is definitely something like that's the biggest, link between Russia and Hungary. That's for sure, as it was for Germany and Russia in the past as well.
Well, if I may interject, I have essentially one last question, and believe me, I'm an optimist, and what you said at the beginning of the conversation gives me hope about what can happen in Hungary in a little under a year, right? But I see the biggest challenge right now, not only the elections, but how to essentially rebuild Hungary after Orbán. I mean, after all the corruption, we're all fully aware of how much Orbán has stolen from the Hungarian people and in funds and stuff like this. How do you rebuild after that?
So let me put this question, let me divide this question into two parts. So the economical background, the deep state, and the institutions. So first of all, because he has, as I said, a supermajority, he basically cemented his power in all the institutions that are somehow should be stand as a sentinel over the executive power. So for instance, the Constitutional Court, the Prosecution Office, the State Audit Office, these offices are all led by Fidesz party members, which is, it's the typical, liberal democracy, or how they call it, the electoral autocracy recipe, that we do have institutions. You can just point your fingers to this building. Hey, that's the building of the Constitutional Court. It exists, but inside it's full of apparatchik, like party people, so. And okay, let's say that Tisza wins the elections. Okay, but in that sense, in an electoral autocracy, it's not enough to win the election. It also depends on how much you win the election. So if Tisza wins with supermajority, okay, there's no question. So they can just revert everything. If they just win like an absolute majority, so they can form a government, but they still have to face with all these institutions that are populated by Fidesz members. So that's going to be a question like they need to somehow create a strategy on how to find some sort of solution to get these people out, or then just to build some sort of like political reconciliation, or we don't know. Every people, what you're asking is the biggest question of the Hungarian people. Every day they make speculations on how it is going to be. It's very similar like in the transition in 1989 or 1990, when the Communist Party said, okay, then it's going to be free elections, we raise our hands, but Secret Service, everything, banking would remain at the socialists, and it actually, they just needed 4 years and they came back in the next elections. So a lot of people say that, hey, maybe you shouldn't try it again because it was a bad experience like 45 years ago. That's one thing, institutions. The other thing is the economical background. And as you said, indeed, the richest person of the country is a friend of Orbán. Basically, they are sharing the same kind of garden in his home village. The second richest person is his son-in-law. And the third richest person is basically his high school classmate. So, it's a little bit like Central Asia kind of democracy, that he built up a very strong economical background who are loyal to Fidesz. The question is, are they going to be loyal if they lose? This is something we don't know, because we also saw that sometimes the economical background, the oligarchy, can switch sides very quickly. But we don't know, like, if there is any way to form a legal precedent to somehow get some money back from these kind of entrepreneurs or this oligarchy. This is something really hard to explain to a German person. I'm also struggling with this because it's such a different trajectory and historical background. And, if you remember, like, why, for instance, Sebastian Kurz had to resign. That's a kind of news we don't even publish in Hungary media because it's a minus. No one will read this news because it's our everyday life. So we have so much serious stuff.
What's interesting that this role model is kind of spreading. I was doing, Georgia for decades. They are kind of similar. They also have those institutions. They formally are kind of independent, but they are filled with bidzina people, and they are all puppets, prime ministers, ministers, whoever. They are prosecutors general, but they don't do it. They just do it for one person. We have some similar little tendencies in Lithuania started. We saw those tendencies in Poland. And when I was in America, I was in Democratic Convention. That's interesting. Former American ambassador in Hungary, she told me that it's actually Trump learned it from Orbán. It's not like vice versa. Trump was, learning this way. That I was so shocked. So those viruses of democracies are spreading, and they are paralyzing democracy, and that's a phenomenon we have to fight with.
I mean, the rejection of these international institutions and domestic institutions of the liberal democracies are one of the strongest common ideological ground between Trump and Orbán and his allies. So I also believe in the US, it's just so much more difficult to achieve these kind of goals because the whole executive power is much more surrounded by different institutions. In Hungary, it was just so much easier to destroy it. And it's also the thing that in Hungary there was a very economically prosperous area, especially from 2014 all the way until COVID. And I think there was some sort of unspoken consensus between people. I mean, the Hungarian people and the executive power. Hey, we see that you're stealing money, you are building up your own economical background, but you're also getting something. And, I think that was a kind of coalition, unspoken coalition between people. The problem is, in every Western democracy, including the US, the economical situation is much worse. And that's why I believe that it's so much more difficult for them to execute this kind of demolition of the liberal democracy institutions, because you can only achieve this when your country is running well economically.
My last question. I'm so sorry that
No worries.
I would spend the whole 2 days with you, because we have to learn from you not to be infected by the same viruses in Lithuania. 2 geopolitical questions. Germany. I heard that German business was kind of playing double. They were supporting Orbán, at the same time criticizing Orbán. So, okay, now, if we have kind of right leadership in Germany, if Merz is coming, if Merz is fighting for freedom and democracy, he's the new leader of the West. Do you think Germans, as you said, Orbán reflects the power? So Germany is a real power. If they reinvest into their economy and military muscles, would Orbán react to that? And my last question on Ukraine. I was in the meeting with Zelensky, with your opposition friend Ferenc, the MP, and he said to Zelensky in front of my eyes, please don't believe Orbán. Orbán is not Hungary. Hungarians are with Ukrainians. It was emotional. It was strong. Can you say like that Hungarians are with Ukrainians and this is just a Russian game and it will be just a bad dream when Orbán is going and out and we will work together on Ukraine?
Okay. So I will start with Germany. It's a bit easier. So first of all, I need to blame a little bit the Western democracies in a sense that during Merkel and her chancellorship, so Fidesz basically passed all these legislations in early 2010, 2011, 2012, like changing the electoral rule, the electoral system, changing the constitutional court members, taking away certain rights and privileges from the constitutional court. So when they started demolishing Hungary liberal democracy, Germany didn't really say anything. They didn't really do anything. And because I think their economical interest was the opposite, because they needed a country which is politically stable, no matter on which ideological grounds. And, at that time, Orbán was not that pro-Russian to be mentioned as well. And for that reason, the EU didn't really do much in the first 4 or 5 years because they were just so busy with the Greece crisis and a bunch of other things. And, Orbán smelled that, okay, we are under the radar, so we can do stuff. So that's why I think some people are still very critical with not just German, but the EU institutions in general, because they believe that, okay, they just close their eyes when the worst thing happened in the first few years. Now, I also feel that the whole situation changed radically. So just to give you one example, Giorgia Meloni. Giorgia Meloni was a very close ally of Orbán. And when she got into power, she moved more closer to the establishment of the EU. And I think it was last year in February when Orbán also wanted to raise a veto against one of the Ukraine found, or I don't remember what was it exactly, but then they just closed the room with Ursula von der Leyen and Giorgia Meloni. And it was Giorgia Meloni who actually said Orbán, hey, you don't have any other choice. If you raise your veto, then you are out, or, and then in the whole meeting was like 20 minutes, so, and I think it was really shocking for Orbán that even Giorgia Meloni was like going after him. So I think, I don't know how Merz is going to form his strategy, because he has many things on his table, so apparently not Orbán is his main topic, apparently, but that really is something that he will need to somehow take care of, while not to violate the German economical interest in Hungary. It's a very tricky situation because, we have a lot of German car makers, factories like Mercedes, BMW, Audi, all has big factories in Hungary, and the whole, economical circle around these big factories. So it's an interesting game that they will need to fight. Ukraine, it's a much more difficult question, because let me just take one step back in history. So, I think Hungary in general didn't have a good relationship with any of the neighboring countries, but that's because of the history. Serbia, Romania, Slovakia, Ukraine, I'm not saying they had a hostile relationship, but a very unfortunate one. But that's because of in each of these countries, we had a significant number of ethnic Hungarian minority, and then, there was always this kind of discussion about their rights and how it is respected, how it's not respected. And for that reason, an average Hungarian people had a quite negative sentiment regarding any of except Austria, because we used to be the same country. It's a different story. And actually, just because of this conversation, I looked up the recent polls that has been published last summer. So it's not maybe not the most recent, but from last summer. And it says that, for the Hungarian people, the most negative figure in politics is Vladimir Putin. But the second most negative is Zelensky, which is kind of crazy. But of course, there's a huge division between, if you ask like, okay, but from whom you are going to vote next election, apparently the Fidesz voters, they hate Zelensky. The opposition voters, they hate Putin. And, it's a big division between how they feel, how they see the world. But in general, Hungarian society is very, very divided. It's not like in Poland, because, if you go to Poland, a peace voter and the Tusk voter, they equally hate Russians. In most of them, they're very critical with Putin because of, Polish history. No need to explain. And for me, that's the very surprising fact, because when I was a child, I also grew up in a conservative family. And I was also like kind of told every single day that, you have to, scare of the Russians because they killed family members and these kind of things. And, every Hungarian family had some sort of negative experience because of the Second World War about Russians, which is, hard to explain. I mean, no need to explain. And it was an extremely effective propaganda in the last 10 years, how Orbán was able to form like 180-degree his own electorate from a very, from a very negative view from Putin to become like the new normality and the new, superstar of the right side. So it's, from a political point of view, it's a kind of, it's an interesting result, but this is something he was able to achieve with a very strong and systematic propaganda. And China, it's a different story because it's a bit far away, and average Hungarian people, I think they don't really have a very strong opinion like Chinese people and Chinese companies. But this pro-Russian sentiment. It's a completely new phenomenon in the Hungarian society, I need to say. I also see that there is a, as I said, there is a generational gap. So the older generation are more like pro-Russians, which is also strange because they lived in the socialist era when we had Russian troops inside the country. So it's completely crazy. While younger generations, maybe they never seen any Russian people in their lives. So, it's crazy. But what I was trying to say that Ukraine, so how the average Hungarian people are looking at Ukraine, it's still very dual because, as I said, our starting point is that we didn't have good relationship with Ukraine, as we didn't have good relationship with Romania and Slovakia and Serbia either. But since the war, most of the opposition voters, they look at Ukrainians, of course, as a victim of Russian aggression. So this whole, Ukrainian sentiment changed in that sense, while the governmental voters, they are feed with this Russian propaganda every single day. As I said, like, for instance, regarding Bucha massacre and bunch of other things. So it's the Hungarian society is extremely divided in a sense of Ukraine.
Okay,
What I'm hearing,
yeah. I'm
Fun.
sorry, I have to drop out
No worries.
because I have a meeting with some mayor in the region of Lithuania that is also taken by a bit more pro-Russian forces. So I'm doing my own little job in the region.
Then good luck for it.
Yeah, thank you, really.
so perfect. Let's all continue fighting against the terrible bear from the east, each on our own fronts, and God willing, we will win. So thank you very much, Matyasu, for your time, for joining us. Because it truly is relatively rare that we get to hear one of the good Hungarians, as they say. So thank you once again.
I'm going to have the future with the people like you. Really, please keep fighting. And I'm always optimist. I really think we will finally win. We will defeat Russian Empire, and we will make our Europe much stronger. And we have to be more confident as Hungarians, Lithuanians. We are this new Europe that is much better than the rest. Thank you, Matyasu.
Absolutely.
Okay.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay, goodbye.
Take care.
Goodbye.
Na kągi, tiek šį kartą. Manau, pokalbis su Matyasu Bodi tikrai atskleidė ne tik kaip atrodys darbas Vengrijoje po Orbáno, bet ir tai, kokia stipri gali būti laisvės siekianti visuomenė, net ir spaudimo sąlygomis. Tyša kova tai ne tik vengrų reikalas, tai visos Europos klausimas. Tad jei patiko šis epizodas, prašau pasidalinkit juos su draugais, prisijunkit į diskusiją ar parašykit mums savo nuomonę. Būtinai prenumeruokit, kad nepraleistumėt kitų pokalbių su tais, kurie kuria alternatyvą autoritarizmui, tiek rytuose, tiek vakaruose. Iki sekančio.